Hello, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, CEO of Media Ops, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to another great webinar. Today's webinar is actually a roundtable, which means that rather than a slideshow, which I think we've all seen enough slideshows over the last 9 months, this is more of a interactive panel discussion with some really great panel members. And also you, the audience, are part of this discussion, right? We've structured this where it's a very open flow conversation. We will be taking questions from the audience as we go. So I do encourage you to please participate, inquire, ask, comment, whatever you'd like. And I'm going to tell you how to do that in a second. Here on Media Ops for our webinars and roundtables, we do use the GoToWebinar system, and that means for most of you, you have a GoToWebinar control panel, probably in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you look at that control panel, you'll see that it's broken into several sections. Two sections in particular that I wanted to call to your attention today. And the first one is the question section. So if you look at questions, and if you hit the little caret or arrow pointing down, you'll see the question section expand. You can type your question in there in real time. There's no need to wait until I ask or we ask for a question or a question period. You can type it in there. And the beautiful thing about it is it's queued chronologically in order of when they're asked. We can respond privately if it's not something that we're going to share with the whole audience. And we also have a record of the question if for some reason we have too many questions to answer today. We can get out to you on email after the fact with an answer to your question. We do believe strongly that every question deserves an answer, or at least an attempt at an answer. It may not be a good answer, but we'll try anyway. So please put your questions in there as they pop into your brain. The last reason to do it is if you're like me and you try to remember your question to the next minute, you're liable to forget it. So it's a good idea to get it in there while it's still fresh. The second part I want to get in is the chat section, which is at the very bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. Here on Media Ops, we use the chat section basically for tech support. So if for some reason the video isn't working, the audio has stopped working or is choppy or some other kind of issue like that, we do have folks standing by ready to try to help you get the most out of your webinar experience today. So if you go in chat, let us know what your problem is, any experiences, troublesome experience. We will try to address it for you. We do the best we can. Let me also state that today's roundtable is being recorded. It will be available on demand, probably within just a few hours after wrapping up today. So if you, whatever reason, if you have to pop in and pop out, you can catch this later as well. That being said, let's jump into today's roundtable, and it's going to be a great one, guys. So about a month and a half, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago maybe, we started a new series here on Media Ops and our digital anarchist TechStrong TV, and it's called DevOps Unbound. It explores different aspects of DevOps, and and that's every other week on TechStrong TV, and it's standalone on Digital Anarchist. As part of DevOps Unbound, though, about once a month or once every 6 weeks, we do these roundtables that are open to the public, and we pick what we think are meaty topics that we can jump into, and we invite a cast of experts to talk about a particular subject. Today's subject is fitting SAP into a DevOps world. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but first, I'm going to introduce you to our audience, and I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves. If you're looking at the graphic I've thrown up here for you, let's go my left to right anyway, and I'm going to start by introducing Wolfgang Platz. Wolfgang is the founder CSO of Tricentis. I should mention Tricentis is a sponsor of DevOps Unbound. Wolfgang, welcome. And you want to just give a quick little background?
Yes, thanks, Alan, for the intro. My name is Wolfgang Platz, founder and chief strategy officer of Tricentis. I've been in the software testing space for very long, and now is good. Like 15 years ago, I started to grow more and more into the SAP world as well. So have seen both sides, so to say. Could be one side also. We're going to talk about DevOps and SAP today, and very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I'm Alan, obviously. Unfortunately, Shane McDonald from Onapsis was not able to make it today. He was a sort of last-minute scratch, so we're going to continue without him. Let me next go to Mitch Ashley, who's the CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I lead an analyst firm that focuses on digital transformation, cloud native, DevOps, cybersecurity, kind of the heart of a lot of the things that are happening now and into the future. So excited to be here with this great panel.
Thank you, Mitchell. Next, we have Ann Lewis, and for purposes of disclosure and to protect the innocent, and is a former director of quality assurance at a Fortune 10 energy company. And if you'd like to give anything else on your background, we're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So I have been in the SAP world, primarily with projects for the probably close to 20 years, and then probably close to 12 years working strictly in the quality engineering aspect of SAP and non-SAP. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ann. Next, we have Chris Truman. Chris is SVP Live Compare. Tricentis. Chris, you want to give a little background?
Yes, thanks, Alan. Hello, everyone. So my name is Chris Truman. I'm part of the products team here at Tricentis. My journey with SAP begins early 1990s, in fact, just after I left university, working to develop software for SAP, but the majority of my career has been all about focused on software development lifecycle and how we can bring tooling that is often quite common outside of SAP into the world of SAP.
So you're a newcomer to the SAP world.
I am a newcomer to the world of SAP.
All right, and then, thank you, Chris. And then last but not least, we have Frank Scharpenberg, who's VP and head of SAP for Cognizant. Frank, a little background?
Yes, Alan. Hello, my name is Frank Scharpenberg, so I'm responsible for the SAP business in Cognizant here for Europe. And yeah, I'm totally on the provider side, so I'm a born natural SAP guy, so I had to learn the whole hard stuff around DevOps and Agile coming from the outside world to our SAP Cosmos. So, and I'm really excited on this discussion now and where we really are.
Absolutely, absolutely. So guys, I thought I would kick off the discussion today with this. I bet if we went back to the very first DevOps days that was held in Ghent, Belgium, and Patrick Dubois and some of the other folks that were there, and asked them, do you think DevOps has a place in an SAP shop, in an SAP world? I don't know if I would have their unanimous agreement that, yes, somehow DevOps would be part of an SAP engagement or an SAP practice in a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company. By the same token, I think up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if we asked most folks who were either as Frank on the provider side of it or as Ann on an actual user space, you know, what role can DevOps play in my SAP practice? You might have been hard pressed to put your finger on it. Nevertheless, here we are, right? DevOps continues to evolve. SAP, I mean, I think one of the things about SAP is that though it's been around, as you know, in Chris's case, in the 90s and before, the reason it is still what it is because it remains relevant by adapting, evolving into to utilize what's available, like any good product or system should, right? And so, Ann, I'm going to ask you to kick off if you don't mind, because you really bring a practitioner's view to this of, what is your view of a place for DevOps at the SAP table or not? I mean, that's a valid point too. So Ann, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much, Alan. So back in 2009, that's when we started looking at doing agile project development, okay, with SAP. And as I was going through the training, I did get a headache, but I also kind of thought of an analogy. And if anybody's had to take a driver's test or learn how to drive in another country, you have to unlearn how you drove in your home country in order to learn to drive in the new country. And it dawned on me that in order to do agile project management with SAP, you kind of have to unlearn how you used to do it in order to learn how to do agile with SAP. And as we went into the agile project management process, there were rough times, no doubt about it. But the one thing that stood out is you've got to have the people with an agility in their mindset, all right? And you also have to have, I'll say, a spectrum of people within that agile team, meaning you've got to have the business contacts in that agile team. You have to have the developers. And so we started realizing that this was a very different way of doing project. And we also had to learn how to think at the SAP sub-functional level, not at the finance level or the supply chain level. You had to start breaking it down into almost predecessor-successor relationships and focus on that and look at the little bits that could be fixed, changed, upgraded, or whatever we were doing. So I think it just in summary, you had to unlearn, you had to have people with an agile mindset, and you had to have business and IT sitting side by side.
I think that sums up what I've heard from others who've been down this road as well. It's in sync, but interested in other thoughts, comments on that from our panel here.
Yes, please, Chris, go ahead. You're the expert here.
I mean, for me, DevOps it's the latest and best mechanism we have for organizing our efforts to transform ideas into working software that we want to have run in production. So I don't know that SAP would have ever been something that people thinking of this methodology or way of developing would have said, oh, we are not going to include SAP in that. I do agree with Ann that because SAP has been around and then there is a change in the way that we want to organize ourselves to support that transformation of ideas. Yes, I think the process of unlearning definitely resonates with me. But I don't think that because it's SAP, that naturally excludes any particular software development methodology, DevOps or otherwise.
Right.
If I can jump into Alan, I know it wasn't the reason why DevOps was initiated, kind of created, but in a way, projects like SAP projects are why we do things like Agile and DevOps. I was going to teasingly ask Ann, now was that one SAP project you were on for 20 years, or was that more than one? You're infamously.
That's a low blow, Mitchell.
I'm sorry. I do that in all fun.
No, it's too early to have a headache. Sorry.
If you've been on an SAP or any kind of ERP implementation, those are multi-year projects, and they tend to start out as 2 years and go 4 and 5. And I think most people would back
and the dollars go with it.
And they go with it because you're touching so many parts of the business, and SAP is the kind of application you just don't install it, configure it, and go. you actually have to either map your business process to it or change your business process while you're digging into it. And that's part of the challenge, is how much do you change and make the project bigger. But my point is, DevOps, like Agile, is not about a technology, it's about how we create software. It's about how people team. But they're nice complements, because Agile breaks things up into sprints, which is why, Anne, as you mentioned about getting things to a lower level of granularity, because you have to do things in 2-3 week increments.
Exactly.
And DevOps, there's so much customization that goes along with SAP. You know, you're not customizing necessarily the core product, you are with the configuration of it, but there's a lot of software that gets created or adapted that either exists or new software in the process. So I think it's a perfect example of why you need something to help you make the problem more manageable.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So,
sorry for that low blow there, Anne.
Just to add on that, I see in the discussion that there is always a very string linkage between Agile and the DevOps part, right? And of course, there is. So if the more Agile you want to be, the more you have to apply some DevOps principle. But a lot of discussions with our clients starts first with, we want to deploy more often, right? So that they say, so we have these typical fancy release cycles for changes once a year, or if they are good, 2 times a year, and we want to lower that. So we want to come down to, and then go on the roadmap, maybe quarterly, then monthly, and even go down maybe to weekly, and some say even submit some small changes on a daily basis. So this is very often the start point of a discussion. So what do I have to change? It's not always that I have to change the delivery method right from the beginning to say, now we always have to do all changes in Agile mode. Yeah, there can even be some changes on a typical waterfall mode, but we want to cut them down into smaller release cycles and deploy changes and innovations, whatever, much more often. And for that, we need to rethink the way how we do development and operations, integrate teams, rethink processes, and of course, then look in the end then on the technology stack as well, who can enable us to deploy much more often and quicker in a much more automated and secure way.
You know, this brings up a lesson I learned early on when I founded DevOps.com and had a chance to speak to many, and found this out listening to many people, which is, you know, the DevOps, each person's DevOps or each organization's DevOps experience is unique to them. If you're an organization that is on an annual release cycle, and you move to a biannual, you know, twice a year cycle, you've made 100%, you know, change to your release cycle. You went from 1 to 2 times a year. If you're at 1 times a year and you go to a quarterly cycle, you have a 400% change in your release cycle, and that's nothing to sneeze about. Now, others may say, "Well, I'm releasing 4 times an hour, and 4 times a year is ludicrous." But no, you get the DevOps you get is the DevOps you deserve. And if you go from 1 times a year to 4 times a year, that's progress, and that's, well, some may think of it as progress, but it is progress in that you are moving from 1 time a year to 4 times a year. And so we need to, you know, what yardstick we judge by has to be unique to our own experiences. What's interesting, Ann, is, you know, you looked at the SAP and Agile piece of it, and I think as Frank and Mitchell and Chris mentioned, you know, then we add sort of the DevOps on top of Agile, or in addition to Agile, or as part of Agile, and what does that bring to it? And, you know, Wolfgang, I'm interested in kind of maybe your take on it. You know, as we move from Agile to Agile DevOps, what effect does that have on the SAP world?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the whole discussion whether SAP and DevOps fit is kind of philosophical here, because as a matter of fact, and the truth of the matter is that SAP forces you to become kind of DevOps-like anyway. their upgrade policy is changing significantly when you enter S/4HANA. You know, today when you're in ECC, you have these 4 times a year upgrades, but that is kind of okay. I know that there have been more often upgrades in the past, but now it's like 4 times a year. But when you go S/4HANA, then you have I know 50 updates are planned just for the remaining 2020. Okay, 50.
Wow,
Yeah, that's a lot, huh? I mean, not
that is.
you don't need to embrace each and every one, and for sure the velocity is going to cool down a bit, so simply because this is too much. But as a general observation, the release schedule of SAP is accelerating massively. So you will need to be able to be kind of DevOps-like in order to keep pace, even with SAP's update and upgrade policy. That's one aspect. The other one is the need from your customer engagement systems, okay? Because these introduce the products more often and want to change them, and at a certain level of your core system, your packaged application system, you will be able to adopt to that. So you will not be able to keep the changes out for long. So I think SAP requires DevOps going forward, just like all the other packaged application systems. This is not just specific for SAP, it's true for an SFTC as well, for a ServiceNow, and so on. And these guys also have big problems, right, when it comes to updates and upgrades. It's not just SAP people trying to shy away from updates, upgrades. No. SFTC, same thing. ServiceNow, same thing, right? It's always horror, update. Oh my God. And so they're forced to do that also. What I believe, though, is different compared to bespoke application development is simply where the pain is residing the most. I would say the pain index is the highest in development when it comes to bespoke apps. The pain index in an SAP system is more leaning towards the operation side. They need because the, so to say, established regression stack is so much bigger. Right? Of course, you're just customizing 30% of that stuff. 70% is already here. I mean, 30% is still massive, don't get me wrong, but 70% is already here. So the pain and the pain spans the whole 100%. That is more with the guys in production than with the guys on the customizing and development side. I think that's different compared to bespoke. And that is also where the perspective is kind of different, right? I would say in a bespoke app, all the power is with the developers. In this DevOps flavor that we see on packaged apps, it's coming more from the operations side, I would say.
Absolutely. You know, I think what we're dealing with here is a question of perception versus reality to a certain extent, Wolfgang, and you brought it out in your comments. Casey from our audience says, can you address the perception that SAP is so complicated that it takes entire project teams months and years to fully implement? And I think that this is true, right? This is a perception is true. Is it true in fact? I don't know. I'll ask Ann and Frank and Chris Mitchell, you've dealt with this, but certainly the perception, and I think in a good chunk of our DevOps audience, right? Because we're DevOps.com. We talk to the DevOps world here. I think a good chunk of our DevOps audience has that perception. So myth or fact? Frank, why don't you kick us off on that one?
So this is a good question in this area. So I strongly believe that coming from the more older world, that it is possible to change into this direction, that there is a need. So for me, this is not a myth in this area, especially when it's triggered out of the now the changes in the SAP discussions coming up, triggered, for example, with S/4HANA. So we have seen that it is possible to set up, for example, continuous deployment change with clients and to go down the release cycle. And it is all about really then continuous testing. And this is possible to set up, but of course it is a lot of work which we are covering here. But it is possible, and especially now with the new compelling event, when people think in the old world we have built our big and monolith ERP systems, right? And we have to now rethink how we set up the future with S/4HANA, and you have tendencies into go more best practice, lean architecture in the ERP, keep your core clean, push things out to the satellites. So all these things to prepare for a more frequent change in the ERP system. This philosophy is all of the discussion when you look for the future in S/4HANA. And this, of course, is then supported with being more agile and adapt to more frequent changes, not only with the release coming in from the vendor, but even coming from the business demand. So SAP perception and the readiness of the ecosystem is changing to be more agile and respond quicker to market change. And therefore, I have to change my ERP more often. And that's why we see in most of the discussions about the change to S/4HANA, now the discussion about how do I do it first time right with an integrated testing suite and prepare for quick and upcoming changes all the time. This is part of every discussion now. So I think that it is possible, and the perception in the SAP community is changing and moving towards the right way.
Agreed. Anybody else comment on that?
I guess I'd like to chime in here and say it's a reality that it can happen. So I will say to install SAP changes, say within a month, you do have to have a DevOps style of working. And this is a support team or a project team, it doesn't matter. But you do have to have a DevOps style. And the other thing you have to have is you've got to have tools that can support it. For anybody to go into fast delivery within the world of SAP, you've got to have impact analysis. You've got to have some way of doing fast testing. And in my experience, we had both. At the time, it was SAP's BPCA, which I know now that they're not supporting. But at the time, it worked. And it was able to show our business contacts exactly what changed. And we also had, Tosca installed. And we were able to then link that change out of BPCA directly into the automated test case. And we were running tens of thousands of tests a month. But it took those two aspects of delivery, change impact analysis that showed us what changed so that we could hone in on exactly what to test, and then to have the automated testing tool. Now, I mentioned BPCA, SAP isn't supporting that now, but we do have Live Compare as it's up and coming and here live. A friend here, Chris, right? That will do the same thing, but you've got to have that. You can't do it without some sort of a tool set that allows it to happen. And those weren't advertisements, by the way, as much as it was a reality of for SAP to be delivered in every month change cycles, or to do an upgrade over the matter of, say, 3 months instead of 6 months. You have to have tools to support it.
You know, a comment from our audience, from this person's perspective, testing, especially regression testing and test automation, is key to faster deployment. And I think, Anne, that kind of in line with your comments. Chris, what's your take on that?
So I wouldn't say that because it's SAP, that means the projects are going to be 5 years long before you can even do anything with the software. I would say that SAP provide functionality that reaches to all aspects of our business. So generally the scope of an SAP implementation might be a little bit bigger than for some line of business specific applications. So the virtue of the fact that the scope is larger will drive a longer duration. But if you look at companies that have established SAP implementations today, and as Anne said, it's not, oh, now we're just beginning to think about how might we deliver things faster. Companies are doing this today. I know we have one organization in the consumer product space where their own industry was facing quite a lot of disruption. And so the business was saying, we need to respond. And that translates not just, as Wolfgang said, from the systems of engagement, differentiation, it means changing our SAP systems much more frequently. And they've gone from 11 to 88 releases a year of SAP. That's more than once a week. And that means shipping to production. Of course, I would say that an instrumental part of this is the right tooling, but a key part was the organizational change, this idea that DevOps is about a way we organize ourselves to get stuff done. So I think it's the combination of those things, but there's one example of where it's not a myth, it's a reality that organizations can go fast with SAP.
Absolutely. And I will just mention Nicholas from the audience. I don't know if he's with SAP. Frank, I'm going to ask you to comment on this one. Since it's a pleasure to interact, he needs to say that SAP is still supporting BPCA.
Okay. All right. Good.
I don't know who Nicholas is, and if in fact
It may
he's
be. I think it may be an old friend of mine, actually.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens. We're not going to ask. We're not going to ask. Frank, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So I think, so to not go for the advertisement, there are of course multiple tools you can use to impact or to detect the analysis or the change impact in the transport request. One is BPCA, of course. The other one we heard is Live Compare. There are some other ones as well. But I think that the question is which one suits best in the end for my perspective. And it's not only to really identify the tooling to change for which regression tests do I have to run for the change I did. Is in the end to identify as well which test cases might be missing. Because this is a very important one as well, because if you then find out there's a lot of stuff missing in the testing, that it will slow you down in your release cycle again. So then for this, you have to make the choice of the tool which supports these two more important features or most important features in kind of live comparison.
Hey, Alan, if I can jump in here
Sure,
too.
Rachel, go ahead.
You know, when we started out, you were talking about, you know, going from one release a year to two. Now you've doubled, and once a quarter you've quadrupled. One of the things that can force this is going to a SaaS or a cloud solution, and SAP does have their cloud platform. So they obviously now have the challenge of how do I introduce, as Chris was talking about, 88 changes a year. It can be on-prem or in the cloud. So kind of filling in the reality, another element of the reality picture, SAP has a pretty vibrant community in their website. I think it's community.sap.com, if I remember right. And they have a whole topic around DevOps. And they've published a number of articles about how you can use sort of CICD approach with SAP and plug in your tools, testing tools and otherwise into that, and tie it into your GitHub repository for builds and tests and deploy. What I've seen of it is primarily focused on the cloud platform, so it may also apply to Prem. I don't know that, but they've got a pretty vibrant community that's building around DevOps. So that should tell us that SAP believes that's part of their future, and maybe it has to be because of the cloud.
Could be. Guys, our audience is getting impatient. They want to dive in a little bit deeper. Wolfgang, I'm going to throw this next question at you, and hopefully it'll kick off a discussion among all of us here. It says, can you please demonstrate an example of how a CI/CD pipeline is actually established in an SAP kind of project?
Okay, thank you. I think it's not so much different, right? Why would it? I mean, of course, the mechanisms are different in the SAP language. You talk about transports, you know all that regarding deployment, but it's not that different. You would deploy your stuff into your quality system, and that, of course, you can trigger automatically, and then you would run your tests automatically. What you should do, though, given that you were pointing towards complexity, Ellen, before, right? That was the question. Are SAP systems so complex? I think I'm with Chris here. It's just because they can do so many things. It's just because they're so massive. The scope is so broad. I mean, it's not that they're unnaturally complex. They're just complex given the span of capabilities that they offer. So and that drives the need for this change impact analysis. You need to have that in order to really succeed. If you don't do it, it's like shooting, how do you call these guns with all these small little, instead of a bullet, they have these small little things that they put out there. You know what I mean? These kind of guns that just spread out a lot of small particles and try to find something, right? This is just not the right thing. For these SAP systems, you want to have bullets onto the changes. Otherwise, it's just going to be overwhelmingly complex. So no chance without that change impact analysis. Ideally, you can even integrate that run of the change impact analysis in order to select the automation that needs to be executed, right? These things need to be integrated. So have we implemented that? We have, for instance, for a big retailer, one of the largest retailers here in Europe, where it works exactly that way. So the automation would even select the tests to be executed and give a warning about what is missing, like Frank pointed out, right? You have this test gap that is also going to be visualized. It says beep, 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 beep. This stuff is missing here, okay? You're still going to decide whether you're going to go live or not. Maybe you are okay, and say, oh, well, it's missing, so big deal. But that is going to become transparent, and it should go even further so that you should have some load testing as well in the continuity of the software testing approach, right? Especially when you move towards the new technologies which may not be on-prem anymore, but which may be infrastructure as a service or software as a service. So, but apart from this, it's just like each and every other project would have CICD, right? It's not any different, I would say.
Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you want to have a concrete example of a CICD cycle, which we introduced for a client. So for example, for one project, we started in Jira. So we said, okay, now we want to be agile and all this stuff. So we are using Jira as well for all the user stories and it harmonized it with the other communities. So then the issue was created in Jira. And then you get a direct linkage, if you want to be a little more technical, to the tooling from the charm document to the solution manager, where you then create the change document ID. So you connect Jira and solution manager charm, which is the first instance if you want to create more the CD part of CI, right? But this is the first thing. These are the two tools where this kind of things is possible. You can integrate then workflow for Outlook approval if you still like that, for the changes to be committed. And then you can deploy them once a change is created, kind of shadow or transport requests, as one example, to your quality system, and then run, for example, the regression test suite, which you have then built up before that to see if there are any impacts. The same thing that you can run tools to identify which test cases you would like to run directly in the same automatic chain as well, like BPCA, or live compare or whatever, to give you the test case which you should run if you just want to do a smoke test, or if you want to run the full regression test for this change scope, whatever. Run this automatically and then get the whole feedback then back to the solution manager and to Jira as well. So this is an example tool chain which you can then use. So I did not mention now which tool for the automatic testing execution. Of course, there are more on the market, which you can easily integrate into this technical workflow. And then these ones you can then connect and then ensure that you are very quick in doing that. So this is possible to get this in a really automated chain as well. So some colleagues of mine actually are really thinking of saying, if we want to do more the CI approach into this value, into this tooling chain as well, let's commit automatically all the changes at every night, for example, on a quality environment, and then run all the time automatically the test cases overnight. So not about thinking about the deployment already that we say we want to deploy to production, but then run overnight what the people have done in SAP, customizing, and then get a feedback on all the regression test scope with everyday change. So there are potential, a lot of things you can do, and you can integrate this tooling in a real efficient workflow and value chain as well, which is quite suitable for clients. I hope it was not too technical now.
No, if you saw the questions we're getting here, I'm afraid to even ask them. I think we need an SAP support person to get to some of these questions. They're very specific. But Chris, it looks like you wanted to chime in here, and I don't want to thwart the conversation.
No, just briefly, I would add that it's not that we have to wait until things land in or even promote to QA before we can be doing useful work. I mean, if we think about CI/CD pipelines outside of SAP, the very act of committing the change is an event that triggers a whole bunch of activities from code quality analysis. So structurally, look at the changes that the developer has made and judge whether they are of a suitable quality. Similar things can happen in SAP. I mean, the vocabulary is different. Now it's when a developer releases a task, that's the triggering event that enables us in development to look at things like the ABAP unit test framework. Are people using it? Do they have unit test coverage? So this fits in the general theme of shift left, right? Find issues in development where it's much cheaper to fix them. I think those outside SAP established benefits of CI/CD pipelines are practical things that can be delivered in SAP today. I know we're doing it with customers.
Yes.
Absolutely. Frank, just for your own, one of the things I love about these roundtables is, I mean, literally people from around the world. So a friend of ours here from Australia wanted to let you know that the integration of Jira with Solman is something they're doing over there in Australia, and they got there to build their CI/CD pipeline, and they're deploying every 2 weeks. So there's proof in the pudding, as they say.
Great.
Another question, there's so many questions here from the audience. Is it possible to implement a test-driven approach to SAP development? How difficult can it be? And are there any special tools? Do we have any testing experts on the panel? But in spite of that, Anne, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask if maybe you want to kick that off, and then we'll have Wolfgang and Chris chime in.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And it's interesting when you do get into the world of testing, you realize that you're not in a world of testing, you're in a world of delivery. And when you take a look at the life cycle of a piece of code, starting with requirements, you have to have a way to collect those requirements in a very efficient manner. And I'll say forcing a business contact to, I'll call it talk through, to do what they do. And that's where you start. And with that business contact as a developer, then you start to appreciate the business requirement. And when I say business requirement, I'm talking about what does the business need in order for this change to help the business grow. Sometimes in the world of IT, we forget how the company makes money. And that's the one thing with DevOps that I had found to be such great. It's just been great that everybody starts learning more about the business. So continuing though, the quality mindset starts with requirements. You do use code impact analysis, you use code security checks. You start looking at your performance of that code. You start talking about how many users there's going to be. And the shift left It's a great term, but what does it really mean? It means talking about everything as soon as you know that there's a question and not putting it off. And then as you get into the build cycle, of course, there's all kinds of ways to use your JIRAs and the tools of today. Again, not advertising anyone, in order to do your inspection of that code. And then coming on around, you go into a kind of an acceptance environment. Throughout all of this, though, you start looking at the tool sets that you have for impact analysis. You look at how you're using your cloud in order to get to that speed to market that we're all looking for right now. And then as you go into more of your, I'll call it your productive phase, you also start looking at your automated testing. You're testing it multiple times. You're testing what's important. This change impact analysis not only will tell you what changed, but by rating the business impact of that change, you're doing a risk analysis. And that risk analysis will take you into testing the 10% of the test cases of what you used to do as being the most important. Anyway, I'll stop at that point and let others respond.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I may, I would like to really point towards the test-driven development question here. I think let's go one step back. What is the core of test-driven development? The core of it is that there is a specification by example which you need to meet. You specify some behavior, and that may be on a technical level or it may be on a business level. When you call it on a technical level, the expected behavior leads into test-driven development. When you call it on a business level, you call it BDD, behavior-driven development. What is the right level, the right granularity? I personally believe that in a system like SAP, I would personally lean more towards behavior-driven development than test-driven development, because the business, bottom line, it is about what the business is going to experience from that application. What is the business behavior? And call it behavior-driven development or specify it differently on a business level expectation, right? I mean, specification, by example, has been out there for a long time, and BDD is now the more modern way of doing it. Is it given when then? That's not that relevant, right? Specification by example is that the real core of it, and that is truly relevant. It brings us back to kind of the old V model, right? That's gone out of shape, or out of fashion, I should say, not out of shape. The old V model that now nobody can even talk about because it's not buzzword compliant anymore, is still there. It's still there. You wanna make sure you specify the behavior early on, and you drive the application's behavior towards that expectation. That's what it is. And I do not believe that this needs to be necessarily happening on a technical level. If you go and ask people who have established TDD, there is a broad range of different opportunities and different experiences in the community. And the more you dig into, the more you're going to see that it might be on a too granular level to drive application development if you do it on a technical level. So I personally believe that test-driven development is too low, but that's a general sentiment. It's not just for SAP. I think that the behavior-driven development approach is going to be way more promising. Sorry for being so frank here. I hope nobody's offended by that.
No, it's good.
Chris, would you like to chime in on that, or?
So I think that just picking up on the test-driven development aspect, I mean, SAP do provide a complete unit test framework for their ABAP development environment, right? The programming environment of SAP. I think in ad hoc surveys I've done at special interest groups run by user group organizations, no one is using it. The capabilities are there, no one's using it.
Why do you think?
I think that's back to a general view, which is that people look at test-driven development as it's a cost. I now have to wait longer to get the change landed in production because you're doing all of this additional work. And what gets lost in that conversation is actually what we eliminated was all the rework because of all the bugs we didn't find until too late.
Well, just a question. We always have this relationship to development, but SAP changes are often not only development and creating big ABAP programs, but you change customizing and configuration, which has a lot of dependency. So I think that the discussion on creating big ABAP or good ABAP code is falling a little bit too short here, because the biggest change is the configuration, which impacts on the whole value chain in an SAP system. And I think we have to ensure that all in each nitty-gritty change you do there is secured during an, or I don't know, automatic testing approach, for example. So this is for me the more complicated one. Yeah.
I agree. Agreed.
And what makes SAP so unique in the discussion of DevOps? Yeah.
Also, another question here is that what are the optimal SAP testing automation tools you suggest, which fit best with the DevOps platform? Wolfgang, I can't imagine.
I'm biased. I'm biased here, unfortunately. There's let me just say there's a company out there. The name is Tricentis, and they offer some great product. And this has been even endorsed by SAP lately because we have gone into a very strategic partnership. And if you would ask SAP today for a recommendation, they would say this is Tricentis. But I'm biased. Please, others.
You know what? In the interest of fairness, and that's Frank. So Frank, obviously, the recent partnership with SAP and Tricentis promises to change. You have a Tricentis, a worldwide leader in testing, promises to change the very orbit of this. But I imagine there are other options out there.
Yes, of course there are, but I have to be careful now that I'm not a little bit biased as well, because Wolfgang me just published an article which will come out next month with us two on the cover. Where says we go the Tricentis way for test automatization in the SAP arena. Of course, so Cognizant has a very huge SAP practice, and we are serving all tools in this area. Of course, it would be unfair to say that you can't use other ones, but I think there is a certain logic why SAP has made this strategic choice. First, I think they found out in their own tool chain, like for example BPCA as one part, there is something missing, and there is something to be integrated. And then I think everybody has to view why SAP has made these particular changes and picked one strategic partner for this collaboration. So from my perspective, there are only two companies outside which offer some really good products in the SAP arena up to a certain extent, and one of them you have already seen here in the call.
So if I could, yeah, let me add, because back in 2015, my team went into a project to determine how to get out of script-based automated testing, and meaning that we wanted to go to model-based testing. And just make a long story short, script testing, all right, required more developers. And it was taking anywhere from 16 to 40 hours to create a scripted test and then a day to run it. And what we found is that our users were designing those tests as if they were doing them manually, and we just programmed it. And they ran a long time. So when we started looking at model-based testing, which kind of broke it down almost, I'll say at the T code level, we found that those could get created in 4 hours, and they were executing in minutes. And so we did a benefits analysis along that route. So for those of you out there that are wondering, okay, it's a bunch of Tricentis folks here. Yeah, it's true. And yeah, Tricentis is now #1 for Forrester and Gartner. And yeah, for Tricentis back in 2015 is the company that we went with. So again, model-based testing is where you need to be, and making sure that that model-based testing can go at the API level.
Excellent, excellent stuff. Guys, we're only like 3 or 4 minutes from the top of the hour, and it's going to take us a little while to wrap up. I wanted to give each of you a chance, just a final comment, but I'm going to ask if possible if you can keep it to 30, 45 seconds or so. We do respect people's time, and I wanted to announce we do give out 4 Amazon gift cards to our audience today, and the winners today are Ann W., Lance N., Tom C., and Richard T. And our folks will reach out to you and get your Amazon cards to you. But I think, Frank, why don't you, if you don't mind, any closing thoughts? And don't feel compelled if you don't have anything specific, we can just move along.
No, I think we touched a lot of interesting points about that DevOps is relevant in the SAP arena, specifically when it comes now in the next discussions with S4HANA, whatever. So everybody should have a look on that. What would DevOps mean for me in this area? We talked a lot about the importance of continuous testing and how you enable continuous testing. I think there is just one dimension which we have not touched, which should be maybe then validated by the audience as well, is cloud. Because a big thing about is if you have a good regression suite is that you have good test environments ready, which you can deploy frequently and change and set up a new system. And to have this flexibility, I think looking towards cloud is one important option when you want to go for DevOps in the SAP arena as well.
Excellent. Chris?
So I'll echo some of the things I've already said. You can't avoid changing your SAP systems. Forget what some analysts said a few years ago about, oh, don't change your systems of record, focus on your systems of engagement. You can't avoid changing SAP. It's the only way to meet the growing business demands. And the benefits that we've all observed outside of SAP in continuous integration, testing, and delivery pipelines are available and are being used today by SAP customers. DevOps, is it relevant for SAP? Completely.
Excellent. Mitchell?
Yeah, I really want to build on Chris's point. And with the increase in acceptance of digital transformation projects, it forces business process change. So you have to work in an SAP environment or your ERP system. So it's definitely relevant. And I think Ann had some really sage advice about the model-driven testing to really save some time and effectiveness on it. So there's some great resources. I popped a few into the chat, so feel free to check that out. I also want to mention Accelerated Strategies has a new report out today about remote work and software development, kind of the COVID, post-COVID. So please check that out at accelst.com. Thanks.
Okay. Wolfgang, we're going to give you the last word because we're going to let Ann go. Ann, you're next.
Okay. Let Ann go. Okay. So Ann will keep it brief. I say that when you do need to look at changing your tool set, you've got to have a cheerleader. You've got to have somebody that can, I'll call it, kind of power through an organization. But that cheerleader also needs some C-suite support. And otherwise, you're just going to keep hitting a brick wall. And so if a lot of what we've talked about, you're going, yeah, I wish I could, find the cheerleader and then let the cheerleader power through and get C-level support with the benefits that go along with what we're talking about.
Yep. And Ann, I made you go first in the beginning, so I didn't want you to have to also go last. So that's why I said I wanted Ann to go, but I apologize. Wolfgang, we're almost out of time, but go ahead.
Just one sentence from me. As I mentioned earlier, to me, it's not a question whether DevOps fits into SAP. DevOps is a necessity for SAP as well. It cannot just step outside of the major trends here, and I'm super excited to see the move there, and we are here to help.
Excellent. Guys, I need to end it. We're over the top of the hour. What a fantastic panel. Thank you so much. We have a ton of questions we didn't get to. My friends at Tricentis and the rest of the team, we'll get these questions out to you. Let's try to get these people their answers. To our audience, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed today's event. We'll be back with another roundtable, and another edition of DevOps Unbound will be out in 2 weeks from today. So you can check that out as well. Have a great day, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, MediaOps. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you soon in another webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.